The smell is dreadful in this warm weather, but the cesspool's so handy for throwing out the slops. And 40 Broad Street's the best house on the street for a young family. We've got the water pump just beside us, so we can fill the water bucket on the same trip, she explained. That afternoon, Sarah did just that. While baby Frances tossed in an uneasy doze in her cradle, her mother wrung out the dirty sheets, which had been soaking all morning in buckets of water. A full bucket in each hand, Sarah made her way carefully out the front door and down the steps, tipping the contents. The disgusting greenish soup of diarrhea and water made her stomach turn into the cesspool. Then she continued over a few paces to join the lineup at the Broad Street water pump, refilling her buckets with wash water after a short wait. The angel of death visits. Frances's summer diarrhea was getting worse. Soon the baby was so weak she couldn't even whimper. Her eyes were sunk into her head and her skin took on a bluish tinge. Sarah fought back her worry and kept busy nursing, gently rocking the cradle, quietly singing, stroking Frances's back. She only left the family's small room to empty the slop pail or to fetch more water. Usually Sarah loved the chatter and gossip in the lineup at the pump. Now, with all her energies concentrated on the small, fragile life at home, she didn't linger to listen to the latest neighborhood news. Even so, she was aware that all was not right on Broad Street. A strange silence had come over the place. Where was the clatter and turmoil, the nonstop rumble of wagons, the shouts of the street sellers? Even the organ grinders had deserted Broad Street, it seemed. The only sound Sarah now heard from outside in the wee hours of the night were occasional running footsteps or muffled cries. That night, there was the sound of someone sobbing. Sarah's husband, Thomas, a police constable, knew only too well what was wrong, but he didn't want to worry her. Finally, on the third evening of baby Frances's illness, he arrived home and sat down heavily at the table. "Sarah," he said flatly, "there's sickness and death all through Soho. I've seen the hearse outside almost every house up and down Broad Street. There are so many dead, they're piling them 2 and 3 deep in the undertaker's wagon. It's cholera, so they say. Everyone who can is leaving. We've got to go too. Perhaps my brother in the country will take us in." He handed his wife a newspaper. "Look here, it's even in the papers." Reluctantly, Sarah read the article he pointed out. This district was attacked by a pestilence which has unfortunately swept away a large number of persons who were here the day before in perfect health. On Friday morning, people might be seen before break of day running in all directions for medical advice. The angel of death had spread his wings over the place. It becomes the duty of all who have an interest in the welfare of the community to investigate the causes of this sudden and frightful attack. Her face grim, Sarah thrust the paper back. "We'll keep the windows shut tight against the sickness. We won't go out unless we must. But to move that child now would be the death of her." Sarah's voice was defiant, but she was fighting back tears. Like everyone in London, she knew that cholera was almost always fatal. The doctors suspected it came from poisoned air rising from garbage heaps, the polluted river, and the raw sewage running in the city's gutters. With the heavy summer heat hanging over London, the stink of rotten sewage was growing worse each day. But until Frances had recovered, they had to stay put and hope for the best. It's all gone quiet. The next day, September 2nd, Dr. Rogers returned to check on Frances. In the Lewis family's room, there was not a sound. Thomas sat at the table, his head buried in his hands. Sarah was on her knees by the tiny cradle. At the doctor's step, they turned to look at him, their faces pinched and drawn, their eyes burning. After 4 days of suffering, baby Frances had died. Dr. Rogers noted on the death certificate that the cause of death was exhaustion after an attack of diarrhea 4 days previous. By now, Broad Street was almost deserted. There was no one lined up at the pump. The shops were closed. Every house had its curtains pulled shut. Along the 2 short blocks of Broad Street stood 49 houses, formerly grand houses of the aristocracy, but now mostly rented out to poor laborers that offered shelter to an astounding 860 people. Almost every room housed an entire family who did their cooking, washing, sleeping, and living within its crowded space. Squeezed in behind the houses and along the alleys were cowsheds, slaughterhouses, and breweries, even a factory for making bullets. All had now gone quiet. On September 3rd, the silence on Broad Street was broken by a distant footsteps coming closer. A man appeared. He headed straight for the street water pump. From a leather case, he took out a small glass bottle, which he filled with water. He capped it, put it to his eye, and stared at the clear liquid for a moment or two, then put the bottle back into the case and strapped it closed. From the clinking as well, he walked off. It seemed that there might be other bottles inside as well. The unusual man was a doctor and a scientist, and at a time when most people broke down in panic at the words cholera epidemic, to him, the Broad Street outbreak was a golden opportunity. He was John Snow, a man who thought he had solved the mystery of cholera and who was looking for a way to prove it.